Hi everybody and welcome to Photomikes Garage. Okay, so today I'm doing one of my first radical mods, if you will. The car needs to be lowered. Just like the first generation Scion FRS that I owned, it's just got too much gap. Too much gap here. It's got to be lowered. That's 1, 2, 3. That's almost 4 fingers of gap here. That's too much. And look at this. 1, 2, 3, 3.5 fingers of gap. Too much. Now in a previous video I actually added spacers to the wheels, to the stock wheels, to make the car look better, which did work, but it actually emphasized the gap. You can see that the front wheels are almost flush with the fender, so that's a good look. On the back, the wheels actually poke out a bit. It's got a 25mm spacer, and that's just a bit too much. But I know that when you lower these cars, even a fairly small amount, it will increase the camber on the back. So this should tuck in. So I'm hoping that if I lower the car, stock wheels with spacers, and it's going to look really, really good. All right, so a lot of people have put coilovers on this new car, the new generation, the 2022 GR86. And I could do that because the ones that fit on the first generation fit just fine on the second generation here. But on my previous car, my Scion FRS, I used lowering spring. So that just replaces the springs. You keep your dampener that you have, you just change the springs, and the springs are designed to lower the car a set amount, so it can't be adjusted. It's a set amount. It's a cheaper option, and that's the option I picked, at least for now, because it worked out good with my previous Scion FRS. I got Eibach Pro Kit springs that dropped the car about an inch. It made quite a difference, and I was very happy with them. They lasted for 9 years practically, no problem. So I want to try that again. However, because the rear springs on the new generation are slightly different from the previous generation, you cannot use springs for the first generation on the 2022. So they have to design new ones, and the manufacturers haven't all done that. So Eibach is not out with their spring yet, but I did find a company that is out with a new spring for the 2022 GR86, and that's what I'm going to install on my car. Yes, there you go. RSR has brought out springs especially designed just for the new generation cars, the new 2022 GR86 and the 2022 BRZ. So these are RSRs. Now this is a Japanese company that's been in the business a long time. I don't know how their quality compares to Eibach, which is, I think, the best for springs, but we're gonna see. I'm gonna unbox these and see what they look like. These springs were $279. So if you're tight on a budget but you want your car to look better, this might be the way to go for you. Oh, and by the way, these are the super downs. There's the part number right there. And RSR makes 2 levels of springs. One is called down and the other one's called super down. These super downs are going to give according to the website, a 1.2 inch drop front and back. That might be just about right, because I know it's got to be more than 1 inch to actually look good. And the downs I think are just slightly less than an inch, like maybe 0.8. So I went with the super downs. And you can see the RSR right there on the spring. That looks quite nice, but I am noticing that the springs do have some scratches and some marks from shipping because they are in such a tight confines in the container. So if you want perfect finish on these springs, I don't think you're going to get it. All right, so there are my new RSR springs. Now it's time for the hard part of actually installing them. Okay, so now the car's in my garage on a level surface, and I'm going to measure the height from the floor to the fender through the hub here, and it's 26.5 inches at the rear. At the front it's 26 inches and 1/8. I'm going to change the springs at the back first. Now, of course, one thing that is more difficult about just installing springs rather than the whole coilover. With the coilover, you just take out the stock dampener shock combination and you just put in the new one and just adjust the ride height. It's pretty simple. With the spring, it's a little different. You've got to take out the stock dampener. You got to remove the spring from the stock dampener and put on your new springs. Now springs like this, they have a lot of force into them. They're under compression, and so you have to use a special tool to compress them in order to loosen a nut and then get the old spring off to put the new spring on. These are what you need. These are spring compressors. You're gonna put them on here, tighten them up, and that's gonna pull the coils together, which will allow you to undo a bolt with no tension and with safety. So safety is important. The springs have a lot of energy. If you do undo them without having these spring compressors on, the whole spring could fly across your garage, could hit you in the head and kill you, which would make you look like a fool. All right, with the safety OSHA message out of the way, let's get on with it. So we're doing the rear. Basically, as you can see, we've got a bolt here. We might have to undo this bolt as well in order to get the lower control arm to go down enough for the dampener to come out, as well as this bolt here. And there are two bolts on the inside of the trunk that we have to loosen off as well. Okay, we open our trunk. Okay, inside the trunk you can see right underneath here is where we want to get. So all we have to do is take off 1, 2, 3, 4 push pins, maybe a bit more, and we'll be able to expose this area. That easy. That easy. Okay, so that easy. That's how easy this will come out. We gotta undo those two bolts and the dampener will come out. Easy peasy. Take off the lower dampening bolt first, 17 mil. And take off the sway bar link. Yep, oh, kind of correct. Bring this out. Oh wow, man, look how easy that came out. You could do that in under 2 minutes. That's amazing. Okay, so here's our stock strut and spring combination. Here's our new RSR spring. You can see they're quite different. The coils are quite tight at the top on the aftermarket RSR and then get loose, and these ones are just, it's quite different. So we'll see what happens here, but now the next step is that we've got to compress this spring just a bit to take the tension off, because we have to undo this bolt. Okay, so this is basically what it's going to look like once you've got them hooked up. So these spring compressors are made for a variety of springs, so they don't necessarily fit perfectly. Like there's going to be a gap here while this one is tighter on this side, and same thing here, tighter here, little gap there, as long as it's going to hold the spring. So we're going to tighten this side just a bit, just so that we can get a little bit of tension taken off the spring. A little bit of tension here, a little bit of tension here. Here we can see that the spring is no longer putting tension on the top hat, which means that we can now undo the bolt right here. Okay, we have an Allen wrench to hold the center shaft from spinning, and a 14 mil wrench, and let's see if I can get this done. Yes, yes. Nuts off, and top hat off. There you go. Then the spring will come right off, and there's your stock spring off. Now these dampeners are very high quality. I never had any problem with the dampeners wearing out on my 200,000 mile Scion FRS, so I expect that these will be just as good. And I can see from the shock that these are made by Showa, which is a well-known brand name in Japan, and it says Showa Japan right underneath. So yeah, this is the good stuff. Now, because we're putting lowering springs on, and in some cases some people trim the bump stops because you have a little less room. You don't really want it hitting the bump stops all the time. This is just for really big hits. Since we are lowering the car, it might be advisable to trim the bump stop just a little bit. Now, I can't quite recommend, maybe it'll make no difference at all. I'm going to trim mine. It's up to you if you want to do that. It may have no effect whatsoever. I'm just going to trim a little bit off. There's our RSR spring. This is what it's going to look like. I have it in the index position on the bottom here, right where the stock spring goes. You can't miss it. That's where it's got to go. And also there's a slight dent in the rubber at the top hat, so I put it in the same place, and it looks like it's going to go in a stock way. Now, the only thing you have to do now, because these springs do not have quite the same height as the original, you don't have to compress them in order to get the top nut on. You just got to push down, and get it started, like so. So I've got it started. So we're going to work on this. We're going to get this bolt tightened up, and then this will be ready to go back in. It was actually pretty fast, pretty simple. But just wail on it a bit. Okay, I guess that's it. Okay, we're going to put it back in the way we took it out. That's right. Should go in. We're going to put a couple of nuts on there just loosely, just to hold it in place while we position it to fit in the rest of the bolts. It took a bit of nudging and prodding to get all the bolts in, but they all went in. So this, so the sway bar mount bolt back in, the dampener bolt back in, and the lower control arm bolt is back in. Now we just have to tighten these up to spec. I love it how these springs are black, shiny black. They're incognito. It's not like shouting out. You just got your little RSR there. I like that. Now it's a good idea to jack up the suspension to its normal ride height when you're tightening up the suspension bolts on the control arm here. That just makes sure that there's no strain on the rubber bushings that are inside there, that they're at their normal height. So that's just a good practice. So we're going to torque these bolts. Let's tighten the lower control arm to hub bolt. This is 81 foot-pounds. The dampener bolt to the lower control arm is 59 foot-pounds. And the end link bolt is 28 foot-pounds. And the top bolts are 22 foot-pounds. All right, there you go. One quarter of the job is done. That was pretty easy. Now for the other side, the other rear one, I'm going to do that now. So it's rinse and repeat. Okay, the rear is all done. Now it's time to do the front. Okay, to get the front dampener out, we're going to have to undo 1, 2, 3 bolts at the top. That will release the top of the dampener. And we will have to undo big crash bolt here, big crash bolt here, loosen off the ABS line here, and of course the brake line is attached to a bracket on the dampener, so that will have to be taken off. So that's 10 mil. I think this is 19 mil. Anyway, we'll find out. Let's start taking off bolts. Also, this bolt will have to be removed. This is the end link to your sway bar. It's attached to the dampener as well. Let's take that one off. Sway bar end link. To undo the ABS line, just lift this up, push this in, and it will come loose. Like that. For the top crash bolt, bring out the big gun. These are 19 millimeter bolt and nut. Now the bottom bolts is a crash bolt that I already installed, which is called a cam bolt. So it won't be the same as what you have. I've already put a cam bolt in here to give myself extra negative camber. Did it. And once it's disconnected from the sway bar end link, like that, it'll come right out. Like so. Front strut is out. Yeah, it looks pretty crazy, but it's okay. It's okay. It can just sort of hang there. And that reveals the nut that we have to take off. But before we do that, for safety, we got to control the spring. So we got to compress the spring, and then we'll be good to go. Okay, now again here, without power tools, this will be very hard because this nut is actually recessed in here. It'd be hard to get a wrench on here. So let's hope that this works. It's working. There we go. Our rubber top. Just take the old spring off right away. And there is our dampener. Okay, there's the old spring. This is our new RSR spring. You can see that the RSR spring is a lot shorter, more tightly wound. Okay, let's get this on the dampener. And again, we want the pigtail to be right in its slot. You can see where it's going to fit right in there. Okay, I've got the spring compressed enough so that I can get the top hat over. The spring is indexed right here at the bottom in its proper position. Now I got to put the rubber top hat on top and get the nut started. Okay, so now we just take off the spring compressors and we can put this right back where it belongs. Okay, our strut goes back in. Back in. We loosely attach the bolts at the top just to hold it in place. There we go. Nut on. All the 3 top bolts have been tightened. They just get tightened to 17 foot-pounds. The end link gets tightened to 34 foot-pounds. And for the 2 big crash bolts, they get tightened down to 114 pounds. You have to really wail on these dudes. Okay, it's done. Quite a bit of work, but it's definitely worth it. All right, the job is done. It's the next day, a beautiful day outside. The job is done. The RSR lowering springs, super down springs are installed. Okay, I'm gonna move her outside so you can see it a little bit better, but you can see right away that the car is definitely lowered. Let's actually do a measurement and compare before and after measurements. Okay, we're on a level garage floor, and if you remember, from the same position, the stock ride height from the floor to the fender going through the hub here was 26 inches and 1/8. Let's see what it is now. What's the tail of the tape? 25 inches. 25 inches. Yes! So that's very true to what is advertised for the RSR Super Down Springs. 1.2 inches drop. And that's about what we got in the front. Let's check the back. If you remember, our measurement on the back from the garage floor through the hub to the fender was 26.5 inches. Let's see where we are now. Yes, I would say 25 and a quarter. 25 and a quarter, what a difference. So 25 and a quarter, from 26 and a half to 25 and a quarter. Wow. Okay, so as you can see, that's lower, quite a bit lower. Inch and almost a quarter in front, an inch and a half in the back. And now, to me, to my eyes, this sits just perfectly. Okay, so 2 opposable thumbs up for the RSR Super Down lowering springs. All right, thanks for watching Photomikes Garage. I will see you next time.